my name is Elena Brooks. I'm 33 years old. And the day my sister called me a beggar, she was standing in the living room of an apartment I had paid for, smiling at a room full of women who thought they were looking at her perfect life. It was her bridal shower. There were white orchids on the kitchen island, blush-pink macarons stacked like little towers, champagne flutes lined up on mirrored trays, and imported candles that smelled like roses and money. My sister, Bianca, had always loved rooms that looked expensive enough to make people assume she was loved properly. She stood near the windows in a satin ivory dress that hugged her waist, one hand resting lightly over the diamond on her finger, the other lifting a champagne glass, while her friends circled her like applause had taken human form. Her future mother-in-law was there. Her fiancé's sisters were there. A couple of women from her bridal committee were there. My mother was there too, floating around with a smile so tense it looked pinned onto her face. And I was there because, after everything, I still believed being a sister meant showing up. That was my first mistake. My second mistake was arriving with the wrapped box in my hands instead of leaving it in my car and driving away the moment Bianca opened the door, looked me up and down, and said, "Oh, you actually came." Not hello. Not thanks for coming, just that. I smiled anyway. "Of course I came, it's your bridal shower." She leaned against the doorway, eyes dropping briefly to my navy dress. Simple dress. Mid-length, clean lines, nothing flashy. Bianca had hated that kind of dress since childhood. She believed clothes should either beg for attention or money. Everything else to her looked poor. "Well," she said, stepping aside just enough for me to enter, "try not to look too uncomfortable. There are a lot of people here you're not used to." I paused and looked at her. For 1 second, just one, I thought about turning around and leaving. But then my mother appeared from the hallway and said too quickly, "Elena, you made it." That tone told me everything. She had already sensed tension, which meant she already expected me to be the one who swallowed it. That was the family tradition. Bianca threw sparks. I carried the burn quietly. So I let my mother kiss my cheek, handed my gift to one of the women at the table, and stepped into the apartment. The apartment. Even now, thinking about that room still does something sharp to my chest. Polished marble counters, cream sectional sofa, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, soft gold hardware in the kitchen, white bookshelves Bianca had filled with color-coded books she had never read. An abstract painting above the fireplace she once claimed was from a boutique gallery in Miami, when I knew perfectly well she'd bought it online using a credit card she later missed payments on. To everyone else, it looked like Bianca's success. To me, it looked like 4 years of my silence. I had bought that apartment when Bianca's life was falling apart, and our parents decided, as always, that her emergencies mattered more than my stability. But nobody in that room knew that. At least, not yet. Bianca moved through the guests with the smooth confidence of a woman performing happiness for witnesses. Every few minutes she laughed too loudly, touched someone's arm, or lifted her left hand just enough for the ring to catch the light. I stood near the dining table and accepted a glass of sparkling water from a server Bianca definitely could not afford without help. That was another thing about my sister. She had always spent money like embarrassment would kill her faster than debt. About 20 minutes in, one of her friends, a brunette with a sharp ponytail and the kind of smile women wear when they are loyal to the meanest person in the room, picked up my gift and asked loudly, "Who brought this?" I looked over. "I did." She smiled at Bianca. "Oh, your sister." Bianca glanced at the box, then at me. "Open it later," my mother said quickly. But Bianca was already walking toward the table. "No, let's do it now," she said. "I love seeing what people think is appropriate." A few women laughed. I felt my jaw tighten. Bianca sat on the edge of the sofa, crossed her legs, and pulled the ribbon loose with slow, dramatic care. Inside was a leather-bound wedding journal set, elegant and handmade, with a personalized cover embossed in gold. It had sections for letters, keepsakes, vows, and future anniversaries. I had chosen it because once, years ago, when Bianca was still capable of softness, she told me she liked the idea of keeping love documented. She looked down at it for a moment. Then she laughed, not hard, just enough. "That's sweet, sweet, the insulting word rich people use when they mean small." One of the women beside her asked, "What is it?" Bianca turned it so they could see. "It's a notebook." The room made those little sympathetic sounds people make when they know they are supposed to pretend something was not cheap. I said evenly, "It's a keepsake journal." Bianca smiled without looking at me. Right, a journal. Then she placed it back in the box and said, You always were practical. That was not praise coming from her. That was an old family code. Practical meant boring. Practical meant not glamorous. Practical meant the sister who remembered due dates while the prettier one got invited into photos. My mother clapped her hands lightly and said, Who wants more pastries? Which, in our family, was the emergency response to discomfort. Feed the silence. Sugarcoat the humiliation. I stayed, I don't know why. Actually, that's not true. I do know why. Because when you've spent your life being the reasonable daughter, leaving feels more violent than enduring, so I stayed. And then Bianca decided to finish what she started. About half an hour later, her future mother-in-law, Vivian Mercer, asked where I lived. It was an ordinary question, but Bianca answered before I could. Elena still lives on the east side. Vivian smiled politely. Oh, is that where you work too? Before I could answer, Bianca laughed and said, No, that's just where rent is still possible if you don't exactly have a glamorous income. A few women smiled uncertainly. My mother gave her a warning look. Bianca ignored it. Then she lifted her drink and added the line that would ruin her whole afternoon. Honestly, don't let my sister fool you with that serious face. She's basically the family beggar. There it was, said lightly, said beautifully. Said in a room full of people who did not know me well enough to realize she was not joking. Some of them laughed. Some looked shocked. Vivian Mercer's smile disappeared. My mother whispered, Bianca, but not sharply enough, never sharply enough. I felt my face grow hot, not because I was ashamed, because I knew exactly how much of Bianca's life was built on money I had bled quietly. And there she was, standing in a living room I legally owned, calling me a beggar. I looked at her. Really looked at her, at the polished hair, the perfect nails. The ring, the apartment she had introduced to everyone as her place, the room full of guests she had gathered as witnesses to the version of herself she wanted the world to believe. Then I smiled, not because I found it funny, because in that moment something in me went still. There are moments when humiliation breaks you, and moments when it wakes you up. This was the second kind. Bianca tilted her head slightly. Oh, don't look like that, she said. You know I'm kidding. I said nothing. My silence always unsettled her more than anger did, because anger gave her drama. Silence made her sound like herself. Before I tell you what happened next, please like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts on this story. It really helps support the channel. Because what my sister didn't know that day was simple. The beggar she mocked in front of her future in-laws was the only reason she had a luxury apartment to hold that bridal shower in. And within the hour, a bank manager would say it out loud. Bianca is 2 years younger than me. When we were children, people used to say she looked like a commercial for expensive things. Golden skin, glossy dark hair, long lashes, perfect teeth before she was old enough to understand orthodontics cost money. Adults adored her. Teachers forgave her. Boys noticed her early. I was the quieter sister, not ugly. Never that, just less immediate. I looked like someone you had to know before you appreciated. Bianca looked like someone people decided they liked before she even opened her mouth. That difference shaped everything. At 8, if Bianca spilled juice on the carpet, my mother would say, Oh, sweetheart, be careful. If I forgot to put my shoes away, I got a speech about discipline. If Bianca cried, people rushed in. If I went quiet, people assumed I could handle it. That was the beginning of my role in the family. Bianca was the feeling. I was the structure. She was adored for being. I was appreciated for fixing. Our father, Malcolm Brooks, loved us both, I think, but he loved us differently. Bianca brought him pride he could show off. I brought him relief he leaned on privately. By the time I was in secondary school, I was the one sorting household papers, helping our mother remember appointment dates, filling out forms, and learning how not to ask for much. Bianca, meanwhile, floated through life on the confidence of a child who had never been taught that charm was not a financial plan. At 24, she moved in with a boyfriend who liked taking photos beside cars he did not own. At 26, she tried launching an online boutique using money our mother borrowed from a savings account that was supposed to help me with a future down payment. At 27, the boyfriend left, the boutique collapsed, and Bianca found herself broke, angry, and 2 weeks away from eviction from a tiny one-bedroom rental she had been pretending was temporary while house hunting. That was the crisis that changed everything. I was 29 then, working as a senior credit analyst for a regional bank. Nothing glamorous. No influencers posted about it, but it paid well. I had saved carefully for years. I lived in a modest apartment, drove a used sedan, and had enough in savings that I was finally starting to think about buying a small place of my own. Then my mother called crying. That was how family disasters always arrived. Not with facts, with emotion first. "Elena, your sister is in trouble." I remember standing in my kitchen with a grocery bag still on the counter, listening to my mother explain that Bianca was vulnerable, already under stress, not thinking clearly, and so humiliated. Humiliated. That word always came before money when it involved Bianca. Not danger, not risk, not consequences. Humiliation. As if embarrassment were the real emergency. By the time I got to my parents' house that night, our mother had already turned Bianca's collapse into a moral test for everyone around her. Dad looked grim. Mom looked frantic. Bianca looked offended by reality. "She just needs a little help getting back on her feet," my mother said. A little help turned out to mean this. Bianca's credit was awful. She had unpaid cards, overdue rent, a judgment from a failed business supply contract, and no bank would approve her for anything remotely decent. But she had met a new man a few months earlier, Elliot Mercer, and she was desperate to keep looking stable. That detail mattered more to her than the debt. A family friend knew of a luxury apartment coming onto the market at a discounted rate because the seller needed to close quickly. It was a smart purchase. Too smart for Bianca to qualify for, too expensive for our parents to manage. And so all eyes turned to me. I knew it before anyone asked. I was the only one with the income, credit, and savings to make it happen. "I can't buy Bianca an apartment," I said. My mother rushed in immediately. "Not for her, just temporarily in your name until she gets herself sorted." There it was, temporary. The most expensive word my family ever used. My father said it would protect her. "Give her stability." Bianca said nothing at first. Then softly, "If you don't help me, I'll have to move back here. Elliot already thinks I'm doing well. I can't let everything fall apart." I remember staring at her, not because she wanted help. Because even in that moment, the thing that frightened her most was not homelessness. It was being seen accurately. I should have said no. God, I should have said no. But I looked at my father, already carrying stress he hid badly. I looked at my mother, who had spent years managing Bianca with guilt instead of boundaries. And I looked at my sister, who, despite everything, was still my sister. So I did it. I used my savings for the down payment. I qualified for the mortgage in my name. I signed every paper, every single one. Bianca moved into the apartment 3 weeks later, crying as she walked through the living room, thanking me, promising it was only until she got back on her feet. "Transfer it later," my mother said. "Once Bianca is stable." Stable never came. What came instead were late payments, missed maintenance fees, appliances Bianca claimed must be faulty because she had not read the manuals, a custom sofa purchased on a store card she expected someone else to help with once the bill grew teeth. I paid the mortgage every month because it was legally mine. Bianca said she would cover utilities and contribute where she could. Sometimes she did. Often she didn't. My mother would call and say, "Just this month, Elena, she's under pressure. Pressure, always just this month." Then Elliot proposed, and suddenly the apartment changed from temporary shelter to Bianca's favorite piece of fiction. She began referring to it as my place casually. At first, it was in small ways. "Come by my apartment. I'm redecorating my apartment." Then bigger. "This is the home I built for myself." I heard that one at dinner once and nearly laughed into my water. Our mother never corrected her. Our father looked uncomfortable, but said nothing, because saying something would have required naming what I had actually done, and our family preferred my contributions invisible. Invisible contributions are easier to spend. By the time the bridal shower invitation came, Bianca had told so many people the apartment was hers that I think part of her had started to believe it. That happens more often than people think. Give a lie enough applause, and eventually even the liar begins to feel offended by facts. I nearly declined the invitation, not because I hated Bianca, because I was tired. Tired of being used in private and dismissed in public. But our mother called twice and then came to my office with coffee like a peace offering. "Please come," she said. "She wants her future family there," I replied. "She wants all of us there." I looked at her for a long moment. "Does she?" Mom's eyes filled slightly. That was another family tactic. Not manipulative in a cold way, more like instinct. She knew sadness reached me more easily than anger ever reached Bianca. "She's stressed," Mom said. "Wedding planning is making her sharp, As if cruelty were just stress wearing heels, I asked, "Do you ever hear yourself?" She looked confused. "When Bianca is unkind, you rename it," I said. "You make it sound temporary or emotional or understandable. But when I react, suddenly I'm difficult." My mother's face tightened. "I'm not doing this today," which in her language meant, "I know you're right, but I'd rather preserve the system than admit it." Still, I agreed to come, because part of me, the old, foolish part, still hoped that maybe this time Bianca would be normal. She was. The week before the shower, she called me 3 separate times, not to apologize for anything, to ask for things. Could I review the vendor contract because she didn't like the deposit terms? Could I transfer the homeowners association guest event fee because her card was acting weird? Could I have the building concierge let in an extra florist team because she wanted the room fuller than the package covered? I did them all. Not because she deserved it. Because if I didn't, my mother would panic, my father would get dragged into it, and somehow I would still be blamed for creating tension. So when Bianca called me a beggar at the shower, she wasn't just insulting me. She was insulting the person who had quietly kept the whole stage standing. That's why the silence inside me afterward felt so deep, because something old had finally died. About 40 minutes after the insult, I drifted toward the balcony to breathe. Inside, laughter continued. One of Bianca's bridesmaids had started a wedding game. Someone was asking how Elliot proposed. My mother was performing cheerful damage control by making sure no one stayed in one conversation too long. I stood outside looking over the city and felt the weight of the mortgage file in my mind the way some people feel weather in old scars. Then the balcony door slid open. It was Vivian Mercer, Elliot's mother. She was elegant in that polished, expensive way that suggested both money and standards. I had only met her twice before. She had always been civil but reserved. She came to stand beside me. "Are you all right?" she asked. That question nearly undid me, not because it was profound. Because she had noticed, I gave a small smile. "I'm fine." She watched me for a second. "No," she said quietly, "I don't think you are." I laughed once under my breath. "I've had practice." That made her expression soften slightly. "She shouldn't have said that." I looked at her. "She says a lot of things she shouldn't." Vivian was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Bianca has told us very little about her family beyond the flattering parts." I didn't answer. What could I say? "Yes, that sounds like Bianca." Instead, I asked, "Are you enjoying the shower?" She gave the faintest smile. "It's beautiful." That was not the same as yes. Before we could say more, the balcony door opened again and Bianca stepped out, smile already in place. "There you are," she said to Vivian. "We were about to do the gift trivia game." Then she looked at me. "We're using the indoor photos now, so if you need to stand somewhere, maybe not in the main sitting area." Vivian's brows pulled together. I said evenly, "I know how to avoid a camera, Bianca." She smiled brightly, the kind of smile that always looked better from a distance. "Oh, don't be sensitive." Then she slipped her arm through Vivian's and guided her back inside. And just like that, the performance resumed. I stayed outside another minute. Then my phone buzzed. I looked down. It was a text from an unknown number. "Good afternoon, Ms. Brooks. This is Daniel Reeves from Harbor State Private Banking. I've arrived downstairs for the title documentation review requested by Ms. Bianca Brooks regarding Unit 14C. The concierge directed me up. I stared at the message. Then read it again. Title documentation review. Requested by Bianca. A slow, cold understanding moved through me. Bianca had done something reckless. Again. And because she liked doing reckless things in pretty rooms, she had apparently scheduled a bank appointment on the same afternoon as her bridal shower. I typed back, "Come up." Then I slipped the phone into my bag and went back inside. Bianca was near the center of the room again, surrounded by women while one of her friends held a tray of ribbon-wrapped cards. Elliot had arrived by then too, probably after some family errand with his father. He stood near the kitchen speaking to 2 guests, handsome and clean-cut, and from everything I had seen, decent in the way men are when they have no idea what narrative they've walked into. He smiled at Bianca often. That's how I knew he was still operating on incomplete information. 10 minutes later, the doorman appeared discreetly in the hallway and said, "Ms. Brooks, there's a Mr. Reeves here from Harbor State." Bianca's face lit up instantly. Then she did something that told me exactly how deeply she had committed to her own lie. She turned toward Elliot and his mother and said brightly, "Perfect, he's here." Vivian looked at her. "Who?" "The bank manager." "I told you, Elliot and I were going to look at release options and maybe discuss leveraging the apartment equity when we start house hunting. He's just dropping off some preliminary paperwork. I felt my heart slow down, not speed up. Slow, because at that point it was already over. Bianca had invited the truth into the room herself. She had done it in heels and pearl earrings, smiling. The doorman stepped aside and in walked Daniel Reeves, mid-40s, navy suit, slim leather folio. Professional calm. I knew him, not personally but professionally. He had handled part of the title side relationship when I refinanced the mortgage 2 years earlier to get a better rate and protect myself from Bianca's unpredictability. He recognized me at once. That was the first problem. The second was Bianca walking straight toward him with the confidence of a woman about to collect paperwork for a property she did not own. "Mr. Reeves," she said, "thank you so much for coming." He looked from her to me very briefly, then back to her. "Of course." Bianca turned to Elliot's mother, then to Elliot, enjoying the moment. "This won't take long," she said. "I just wanted to get some of the housing conversations started early so we can be organized after the wedding." Organized? I almost smiled. Daniel Reeves opened his folio. "Well," he said pleasantly, "I do have the preliminary file here, but before we discuss any equity options, I need the owner's authorization and signature." Bianca extended her hand automatically. "Of course." Daniel did not hand her the file. He looked at me. "Ms. Brooks." The room changed, only slightly at first. Enough for my mother to stiffen, enough for Elliot's smile to fade. Bianca blinked, then laughed. "Oh no, you can give it to me. Elena's just my sister." Daniel's expression remained politely neutral. "I understand. However, the property is registered to Ms. Elena Brooks, so I'll need her signature for any title-related discussion." You could feel the room inhale, not gasp, inhale. A collective, involuntary pause. Bianca's smile froze. "What?" Daniel glanced down at the file briefly, then back up. "Unit 14C is currently owned by Ms. Elena Brooks." My mother closed her eyes, not in surprise, in dread. Elliot looked at Bianca. Bianca's bridesmaid with the ponytail actually laughed a little at first, thinking it must be some kind of mix-up. "It's in my sister's name temporarily," Bianca said quickly. "Family arrangement?" Daniel, still composed, asked. "Then has there been a transfer request filed that I'm not seeing?" No one answered, because there never had been. Bianca's voice sharpened. "There must be some misunderstanding." He opened the folder slightly and turned a page. "There is. Ms. Elena Brooks is the titled owner and mortgage holder. She is also the party who completed the last refinance and has maintained the payment record." That line hit harder than the first. Maintained the payment record. Now the lie was not just about title. It was about money. Elliot's face had gone very still. Vivian Mercer looked at Bianca in a way that made her satin dress suddenly seem too thin. My mother took a step forward. "Perhaps this isn't the time." Bianca turned on Daniel. "Why would you say that in front of everyone?" He looked genuinely confused. "You invited me up to discuss the apartment's equity position." For 1 second, nobody spoke. Then Elliot finally did. "Bianca," he said slowly, "what exactly is he talking about?" She laughed, the brittle kind. "It's not a big deal. Elena helped me when I first moved in, that's all." I said quietly, "That's not all." Every eye shifted to me. I wasn't trembling. I wasn't angry in the loud way Bianca liked to use anger. I was tired. The kind of tired that makes honesty sound calmer than people expect. Bianca stared at me, panic beginning to shine through the polish. "Elena," she said through her teeth, "not now." And that was it. Those 2 words, not please, not I'm sorry, not can we talk privately, just not now, as if truth were being rude. As if she had not spent the last hour calling me a beggar in the apartment I paid for. I looked at her, then at Elliot, then at Vivian, then at the room full of women who had laughed because the joke had sounded plausible. Then I said, "She called me a beggar 20 minutes ago." You could hear the chandelier hum. That's how quiet it got. Bianca's face flushed dark red. "Don't do this," my mother whispered. I turned to her. "No, I'm done not doing this." Then I looked back at Elliot and Vivian. 4 years ago, Bianca was about to be evicted and her credit was so damaged she couldn't qualify for anything. Mom and Dad begged me to help. I used my savings for the down payment. I took the mortgage in my name. I signed every title document. I've paid every mortgage installment because the apartment is legally mine. Bianca took a step toward me. "That's not fair." I laughed once, not kindly. "Fair." She looked around at the guests, then back at me, desperate now. "I've paid things too. Some utilities," I said. "Sometimes and usually late." My mother said, "Elena, enough." I looked at her. "Why? Because now people can see it." That made her go silent. Elliot's voice, when it came, was low and controlled. "Bianca," he said, "did you tell me you own this apartment?" Bianca swallowed. "Did you?" looked at him, then at Vivian, then at me, as if one of us might save her from the answer. Yes, she said finally, but it's complicated. Vivian's expression hardened. No, I said quietly. It is. Daniel Reeves, still holding the file like a man who deeply wished he were somewhere else, cleared his throat slightly. I can return at another time, he offered. But Elliot didn't take his eyes off Bianca. What else have you lied about? That question split the room wider than anything I'd said. Because once people realize one important thing is fake, every other beautiful surface starts looking suspicious. Bianca's friend with the ponytail set her champagne down. One of the older guests actually sat down slowly as if her legs had stopped trusting the floor. My father appeared in the hallway then. He had been downstairs with Elliot's father and missed the opening of the disaster. He stepped into the room smiling at first, until he saw everyone's faces. What happened? No one answered immediately. Then Bianca whispered, Elena's trying to ruin my bridal shower. I turned to her in disbelief. Even then, even now, still that. My father looked from her to me, then to Daniel Reeves, then to the open file. He understood faster than I expected, because shame recognizes paperwork instantly. Elena, he said quietly. There was pain in his voice, not at what I had done. At what he knew I was finally forced to name. I looked at him. Dad, she called me a beggar. His face changed. For the first time all day, someone in my family looked shocked by that part and not the exposure. What? He said, turning to Bianca. Bianca's eyes filled with tears, useful tears, the kind she weaponized since childhood. I was joking. No, Vivian Mercer said. All of us turned toward her. She was no longer smiling. Her voice was crisp, measured, and absolutely cutting. That wasn't a joke. And this, she gestured very lightly toward the room, the apartment, the documents, is not a misunderstanding. It's misrepresentation. That word hit Elliot hardest, because men like him can forgive mess. They struggle more with deception that makes them look foolish. Bianca tried one last time. I was going to fix it after the wedding. I stared at her. That was the most honest thing she had said all day, not because it was true, because it showed how she thought. Truth could always be deferred until after the next event, after the next impression, after the next person had been successfully convinced. Elliot stepped back from her. Did you ever intend to tell me? She didn't answer. He nodded once like a man receiving confirmation he never wanted. My mother moved in again, frantic now. Everyone, please, emotions are high, but there was no stitching the room back together. Not after that. Not after Daniel Reeves handed the folder, this time directly to me, and said, Ms. Brooks, if you'd still like to review the equity inquiry, we can schedule another time. His professionalism made it worse, because there was no drama in him, just administration, documentation, the plain voice of reality. I took the folder. Thank you, I said. Bianca looked at the folder in my hands like it was betrayal made paper. Then she said the one thing that finally burned away the last of my restraint. You knew this would happen. I looked at her. No, you invited him. Her face crumpled, not delicately, not prettily, in actual rage. You always hated me, she snapped. You waited for a chance to humiliate me. I felt something cold settle in my chest. No, Bianca, I said. I waited for a chance to stop lying for you. The room stayed silent. Then Elliot's father, who had just entered behind my dad and was now hearing enough to understand everything important, said quietly, Elliot, we're leaving. Vivian nodded. Elliot didn't argue. He looked at Bianca once long enough for her to realize pleading would not work, then said, We'll talk later. He walked out with his parents. 3 bridesmaids followed a minute later, pretending they were checking on guests or coordinating pickups. In truth, nobody wanted to be near a collapsing illusion if they weren't paid to clean it. Within 10 minutes, the shower was over. Not officially, just spiritually. One by one, women collected handbags, kissed air near Bianca's cheeks, and disappeared. My mother cried in the hallway. My father stood still with his hands on his hips, that posture men adopt when they know they failed something essential but don't yet have words for it. And Bianca? She stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by flowers I had once admired and candles burning down into expensive wax puddles, looking at me like I had destroyed her life. Maybe, in that moment, she believed it. That's the problem with people who live on scaffolding built by others. When the truth comes, they blame the person who stopped holding it up. She waited until the last guest left. Then she turned to me and hissed, Get out. I almost laughed. Instead, I said, Really? She pointed toward the door, shaking. Get out of my apartment. There it was again. That phrase, my apartment. Even then, even after the bank manager, even after Elliot, even after the titled documents. That was Bianca all over. Reality could hit her in the face and she would still call it rude. I looked at her for a long second. Then I set my handbag on the table and pulled a single key from my ring, not the spare key, the master key. I placed it gently beside the folder. "Bianca," I said quietly, "if you ever call me a beggar in my own property again, I won't just correct you in front of your guests. I'll give you formal notice." She stared at the key, then at me, then at our mother as if Mom might undo the sentence by crying hard enough. Mom didn't. Dad didn't. Because for the first time, both of them looked like they understood that I was done being their invisible solution. I picked up my bag. My father said very softly, "Elena, wait." I turned toward him. There was grief in his face, and shame, deep old shame, not because I had spoken, because he had known somewhere in him for years that this was wrong and kept taking the easier road anyway. "I didn't know she said that," he said. I believed him. That was the tragedy. He had not heard the insult. But he had helped build the system that made Bianca comfortable enough to say it. "I know," I replied. That hurt him more than if I had yelled. Then I walked to the door. My mother called after me. "Elena, please don't do anything drastic." I turned once more. "Drastic," I said. "Mom, I bought an apartment for your daughter, paid the mortgage for years, covered her building fees when she forgot, let her tell the world it was hers, and stayed quiet while she insulted me. The drastic thing was how long I let it go." No one answered, so I left. If the story ended there, it would have been enough. But life, unlike stories, enjoys aftermath, and aftermath is often where the real damage shows. That evening, my phone exploded. First my mother, then Bianca, then two cousins who had heard something happened. Then a message from Bianca that began, "How could you do that to me? Not thank you, not I'm sorry, not I know I crossed a line, just that." I stared at the screen from my couch while the city moved outside my windows and something in me slowly began to uncoil. Because I had spent so many years expecting to be the guilty one whenever I finally defended myself. But I didn't feel guilty. Sad, yes. Tired, yes. A little shaky, yes. But guilty? No, that was new. My father came to my apartment the next morning. He looked older than he had 2 days earlier. That happens to men when denial stops protecting them. He stood in my doorway holding a paper bag from the bakery near my office. Blueberry muffins, my favorite. It nearly broke me, because parents often fail you most painfully when they get small things right. "Can I come in?" he asked. I nodded. We sat at my kitchen table. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "I should have stopped this years ago." I looked at him. "Yes." He closed his eyes briefly. "I know." That mattered to me, not because it fixed anything. Because he didn't hide behind confusion or excuses. He knew. "I thought it was temporary," he said. "At first. I know. And then every time I told myself I'd said it right, there was another problem, another excuse. Another time Bianca was unstable, or your mother was worried, or you seemed strong enough to manage. There it was, the great curse of being the competent child. People use your strength as permission to burden you." I asked, "Do you know how much I've spent on that apartment?" He looked ashamed. "No," I told him. "Not to the dollar, close enough." His face drained. "Elena, I delayed buying my own place because of that apartment. I refinanced to keep the payment manageable. I covered building assessments twice when Bianca ignored the notices. I paid for the broken fridge she claimed suddenly stopped working because she overloaded it. I paid when her card got declined for the event security deposit yesterday." Dad sat back like he had been hit. "She asked you for money for the shower too." I smiled without warmth. "Of course she did." He rubbed his face. "I failed you." The words landed heavily between us. I had imagined hearing them before, in anger, in fantasy, but the real version was quieter and harder to hate. I looked at him for a long time, then said, "Yes, but you can stop failing me now." He nodded slowly. "What do you want me to do?" That question mattered, not because he was finally asking what I wanted, because for the first time I had an answer. "I want boundaries," I said. "Real ones. Bianca pays market rent or she leaves. No more family fiction. No more telling people it's hers. No more calling me selfish whenever I ask for what belongs to me." He took that in, then nodded again. "You'll have it." I believed he meant it. I just didn't know if he had the spine to survive what it would cost him at home. That answer came faster than I expected, because Bianca called me that afternoon screaming. Not crying, screaming. "You turned Dad against me." I held the phone away from my ear until her voice lowered slightly. Then I said, "Dad turned toward the truth. That's not the same thing." "You humiliated me in front of Elliot's family." "No," I said. "You humiliated yourself in front of Elliot's family. I just stopped protecting you from it." She made that sharp, furious sound people make when they realize a familiar weapon isn't working anymore. Then she said, "You always hated that people loved me more." I laughed. actually laughed. Bianca, are you listening to yourself? This is exactly why you keep ending up here. Nothing is ever about what you did. It's always about what you imagine someone else felt. She went silent for a beat. Then coldly, so what now? You're throwing me out. I looked around my apartment. At the small reading lamp I bought secondhand. At the framed print above my couch. At the life I had built carefully while she decorated fiction with fresh flowers. No, I said. Now you become an adult. Either sign a proper tenancy agreement and start paying rent on time, or you move. Her breathing changed, because finally, somewhere inside all the outrage, fear had reached her. You wouldn't do that. I should have done it years ago. She hung up on me. 2 hours later, our mother called, naturally. Elena, please, Mom began, voice already wet with stress. Don't force this right now. Bianca is devastated. Elliot won't answer her calls. She's under so much pressure. I closed my eyes. Mom. She made a terrible mistake, yes, but now is not the time to be rigid. Rigid. That was the new word when self-respecting sounded too honest. Mom, I said again, more firmly, if I collapse under pressure, does anyone tell Bianca to protect me? She fell quiet. I continued. When I delayed my own plans because she needed a luxury building to keep up appearances, did anyone say she should be gentler with me? No answer. When she called me a beggar in the apartment I owned, did you stop her? I tried. No, you softened it, like always. My mother began crying properly then. In the past, that would have undone me. This time it didn't, not because I stopped loving her, because I finally understood that her tears often arrived at the point where accountability should have. I love you, I said quietly, but I'm done financing this family's denial. Then I hung up. That night, for the first time in years, I slept deeply. Not happily, not triumphantly, just deeply. There's a kind of exhaustion that only ends when you stop volunteering your backbone to other people's emergencies. Over the next week, the Mercer family silence became its own message. Elliot did not call Bianca. Vivian Mercer sent a brief, formal note to my mother saying the wedding discussions were paused pending clarification of several serious concerns. Paused was a polite word. Bianca interpreted it as temporary. I knew better. Men from families like Elliot's do many foolish things. Marrying into a lie they can now clearly identify usually isn't one of them. Meanwhile, I emailed Bianca a draft tenancy agreement prepared by my lawyer. I did not do it dramatically. No vindictive tone. Just a clean message with 2 options. 1. Sign the lease, begin paying rent, and acknowledge my ownership formally. 2. Vacate within 60 days. She ignored it for 48 hours. Then my father called to say she had moved back into their house for a few days. I sat with that. Not because I felt guilty, because I knew what it meant. She was trying to punish me by abandoning the apartment, assuming I would panic about the empty unit, the optics, the mortgage. 4 years earlier, that strategy might have worked. Now, I almost felt relieved. Did she take everything? I asked. Most of it, Dad said. Some furniture, too. I smiled faintly. Furniture I paid for, or furniture she paid for, he sighed. Both, probably. That sounded about right. 3 days later, I went to the apartment. Alone. The concierge looked uneasy when I arrived, which told me Bianca had said something. But he greeted me politely and gave me the updated access log. Inside, the place looked like a party had lost the will to continue living. The flowers were gone. A few decorations still hung near the dining area. One bedroom was half empty. The kitchen smelled faintly of expensive candles and stale sugar. I walked from room to room slowly. There was no dramatic soundtrack, no perfect feeling of victory. Just a strange, sober quiet. 4 years of my labor had lived inside those walls, invisible. Now I was finally seeing the apartment without Bianca's performance draped over it. And you know what I felt? Anger, yes, but also grief. Because I could see, very clearly, what my life might have looked like if I had chosen myself sooner. I stood by the window and thought about the first time I signed the mortgage papers. I remembered telling myself it was an act of love. Maybe it was. But love without boundaries becomes self-erasure. That was the lesson. Not that Bianca was cruel, I already knew that. The lesson was that I had mistaken my willingness to sacrifice for moral superiority, when in reality it had just been fear. Fear of being the daughter who said no. Fear of what it would mean if I stopped being useful. Fear that love might not survive limits. I changed the locks that week. Legally, cleanly, properly. Not to be dramatic, to be finished. I also hired a decorator to repaint 2 rooms, staged the apartment minimally, and listed it for lease at market rate. Within a month, a corporate lawyer moving from Boston signed a 1-year lease at a rate that more than covered the mortgage and building fees. On the day the first real rent payment hit my account, I sat at my desk at work and stared at the confirmation longer than I should have. Because that payment represented more than income. It represented permission. Permission to stop turning my life into emergency scaffolding for people who clapped when someone else mocked me. Bianca and Elliot officially ended the engagement 6 weeks later. My mother told me over the phone as if I were expected to feel ashamed. He said trust matters too much to him. I stirred my tea and said nothing. He thinks she lied about too many things. Still nothing. Then Mom said, quieter, she's heartbroken. I closed my eyes. Part of me did feel sad, not for the wedding. For the life Bianca could have had if she'd ever learned that being loved honestly is better than being admired falsely. She needs to grow up, I said. My mother exhaled shakily. You sound so cold. No, I replied. I sound tired. That was the truth, not cold, tired. Tired of every consequence in Bianca's life arriving at someone else's door first. Eventually, Bianca did something unexpected. She asked to meet, not at our parents' house, not over the phone. At a coffee shop halfway between my office and hers. I went mostly out of curiosity. She arrived 10 minutes late, sunglasses on, hair pulled back, face bare in a way I had almost never seen in adulthood. She looked smaller, not less beautiful, just less armored. We sat across from each other in a corner booth. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then she took off her sunglasses and said, I didn't know he would come up like that. I nearly laughed. Not because it was funny, because even now that was her opening. Not I'm sorry I called you a beggar. Not I lied about the apartment, just the logistics of her exposure. I looked at her. Is that what you wanted to say to me? She looked down at her coffee. No. Good, she was learning maybe, slowly, painfully. She took a breath, then said, I'm sorry. I stayed quiet. For the shower, she added, and for everything around the apartment. Around the apartment, I waited. She noticed. Then she said it more plainly. I'm sorry I let people believe it was mine. I'm sorry I said what I said. I'm sorry I treated you like. She stopped. Like what? I asked, her eyes lifted to mine. Like you existed to fix things for me. There it was, late, but real enough that I felt something loosen. Not forgiveness, not yet, just recognition. I said, why did you do it? She looked confused for a second. Then understood I wasn't asking about the insult. I was asking about the years. She stared out the window. Because it was easier, she said finally. Because you always managed. Because if I admitted the apartment was yours, then I had to admit I wasn't who I wanted people to think I was. That answer hurt more than a lie would have, because it was honest. And because, underneath all Bianca's vanity, there had always been fear. Fear of being ordinary, fear of being dependent, fear of being seen without all the shine. She had responded to that fear by making me carry the truth for her. I asked, did you ever plan to tell Elliot? She gave a helpless little laugh. I kept telling myself I would explain it later, after the engagement, after the shower, after the wedding, after we bought a bigger place. She shook her head. There was always going to be another later. I nodded. Yes. Then we sat in silence for a while. Finally she said, I know you probably hate me. I looked at her carefully. No, I said, I don't hate you. That surprised her. I was close, I added, but mostly I was tired of disappearing. Tears filled her eyes then. Not dramatic tears, just tired ones. For the first time in years, I believed she wasn't performing for an audience. I don't know how to fix this, she whispered. I thought about the mortgage papers, the shower, the years. Then I said the truest thing I had. You don't fix it by crying in front of me and then going back to who you were. You fix it by becoming someone who would be ashamed to say those things in the first place. She nodded, tears slipping down finally. That meeting didn't heal everything. People love stories where one conversation repairs a lifetime of imbalance. That's not how families work. What it did do was start a different version of us. One where Bianca no longer got to pretend she didn't know. And where I no longer volunteered to be the quiet wall her life leaned on. It's been almost a year now. The apartment is still mine. The tenant renews next month. I used some of the rental income to finally buy a small townhouse on the west side with a narrow porch and a kitchen that gets golden light in the evenings. The first time I walked through it after closing, I cried. Not because it was grand. Because it was mine in a way nothing had ever fully been before. Not mine but available. Not mine until family needs it. Just mine. My relationship with my parents is better now, but different. My father tries harder. That matters. My mother still reaches for the old language sometimes. Bianca is fragile, be gentle, don't escalate, then catches herself. I appreciate the catching. It means some part of her is finally listening. Bianca and I are careful. That's the word. Careful. We speak. We meet sometimes. She has a smaller apartment now, one she actually rents in her own name. It suits her better than the old place ever did, though she would never admit that. There are days I see the sister she might have been if our family had loved her honestly, instead of indulgently. And there are days I still remember her standing in my living room, glass in hand, calling me a beggar. Both things can be true. That's adulthood. Understanding someone's wound does not erase the bruise they left on you. If there's one thing I learned, it's this. People will call you selfish the moment your sacrifice stops being automatic. They will say you changed when all you really did was stop participating in a lie that benefited them. Bianca called me a beggar at her bridal shower because she believed the role I'd played for years could survive any insult. The quiet sister, the practical one, the one who would never expose her. She was wrong. Not because I became cruel, because I finally became visible. And when the bank manager looked at me in that crowded room and asked for the owner's signature, it wasn't just the apartment that was being named. It was the truth of our whole family. Who carried what? Who paid for what? Who was loved loudly and who was relied on silently. My sister called me a beggar. Then the bank manager revealed I owned her apartment. But the most important part of the story isn't that she was humiliated. It's that I finally stopped confusing love with surrender. I didn't need applause. I didn't need revenge and fireworks. I just needed one thing I should have given myself years earlier. A line. A real line. And once I drew it, everybody who had been living comfortably on the other side finally had to see it too.